Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton here with Brandon. A couple of events over the last couple of weekends and a couple of notes for the future. We'll jump into the London BCS regional first. Winning team, Pants Choice Spy Family, Caligura Hololive, and the Avatar list, Toph Azula, the standby list. Second place, another Avatar, 8 standby Hololive, followed by Chainsaw Man. Third place, Nino Quince, Ain's Overlord, and Caligura Hololive. And in fourth, another Chainsaw Man, Meliodas SDS, and 8 Salvage Gungale. Up until that fourth team, nothing too unusual here. Kind of your usual suspects. Spy Family, we expected to do decently well in fits and spurts, so seeing it here isn't that big of a surprise. The Pants Choice list seems to be the most popular one. Not surprising to see, if you're going to see a Spy Family list top, this was the one that you kind of expected to see. One, because of that anti-damage, scry that it just gets starting at level 1, as well as, just the popularity of this build as being, kind of presented as the meta list. Nothing too surprising there. Until you get to the fourth place team, where you see a Meliodas and an 8 Salvage Gungale. Meliodas in an interesting spot. It was kind of written off for a long time, just because it's something that can be played around. But I'm wondering if, because it's kind of dropped out, if people aren't playing around it anymore, or maybe some players don't know how to play around it because it's been out of the meta just long enough. But Meliodas still quite present in London, as well as 8 Salvage Gungale. We talked about at the start of the season how you can play pretty much anything at Springfest and give yourself a chance. 8 Salvage Gungale is a Springfest darling, has been for years. This one was a little bit different. It leaned a little bit more into the green. It played 4 copies of a burn event that burns for each copy of itself in memory, and also gets to Mocha 1 when it's played. So a couple of interesting things in London. Brandon, what sticks out to you?
So I actually think that the GGO deck is actually decently positioned, right? It has a couple different answers to a couple different things in the meta, especially with some of the big 2-1 combos that come down at 1 not present. I think this kind of opens us back up to seeing this a little bit more often. I didn't expect it to get played, but the fact that it was played and was able to do well is not surprising. Outside of that, realistically, these are kind of generically the list we expect to see. The Meliodas is a little different, but I think that it's basically Elizabeth plus whatever top end you're going to attach to it. The Elizabeth has enough of an advantage engine to be able to generate things going forward. You have the tools and pieces to have a pretty decent kind of like mid-game strategy, so it's just a matter of how are you going to try to close the game. Having the Meliodas there to try to close that game out that way, I think it's perfectly fine. I think it makes a lot of sense where things are. It also gets big, so it's winning board. So yeah, no, absolutely.
Moving on to Houston, 51 team regional. This one got a little off the wall. Pretty normal up at the top. Chainsaw Man, 8 standby, Hololive, and Avatar. Overlord, Hendrickson, Caligura in second. In third, Review Starlight, Pants Salvage, Chainsaw Man, and Avatar. And then in fourth, Pants Salvage Spy Family, a Sokka Aang Avatar list, and an 8-bar Hololive that plays the level 1 Bay into the level 3 Toa. Starting with that third place Review Starlight list, pretty normal for a Starlight list, just a bunch of decent profiles. The level 1 Maguro combo into the level 3 that tries to, get an additional attack as well as some burns. The fourth place team is full of interesting stuff. Um, you don't usually see the Your top end paired with the Pants, but it is a pay 1 burn 4. So a Hendrickson style, big burn at the top with, the same level 1 anti-damage scry engine. And then this 8-bar Hololive list, we've talked about how you can just throw 2 good combos together and get a good deck out of it in Hololive. And this deck really tests the limits of that, but obviously it's here in top 4. And, looking at it, it has a game plan, and that game plan apparently worked well enough. The Bay gains the ability when you play the CX that it can't be reversed the following turn, so in theory, you can just loop this thing. Just play into the bar as much as you can, get the bar back into your hand, and just keep slamming it, and just maintain an advantage engine all the way through the game just by not letting your bays die. And you can crash them, like they can't get reversed. So You just get to do that up until level 3. They're playing 4 copies of the Iris early play, which is such an interesting card. Like, I like this card. It's an interesting choice as a 4 of. I think that might be in part just to bring the soul trigger count up because there aren't very many triggers in this deck. It's an early play that when it attacks, all of your characters get 2,500 power, and on reverse, you clock shoot so that your opponent heals 1, and then you shoot the card across from your card to clock into the Toa top end, which heals on play, pay 1, pitch 1, Mocha 1, and then 3 card Icy Tail, but it's a level 0 Icy Tail. So a little more likely to hit, and you also get to potentially put a 0 on the bottom of their deck to try to turn that into, more than, just a blind 3 card Icy Tail for zeros. Again, we've talked about this many, many times. Like, you can do anything in Hololive, and it probably will come together. And this is like, exhibit A for that concept.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting team because you're able to see quite a variety of different builds here. And like, that they made it to top 8. So there was a lot of wins across this team. So you're not quite sure like where the wins came from sometimes, because some of these matchups I think they might struggle win pretty heavily, but some of them I think there's some like decent matchups in there. So like I think that like this team specifically, you kind of have to really like pay attention. Like, okay, what's the big key pieces that's going on here, and how to get to what it needs to do. I think the big thing that all 3 of these decks can do is it can bring down its end game early, right? Spy Family can bring down the salvage at 2. Avatar can bring down its burn 1s at 2. You can bring down Hololive, not all of it, but you can bring down a good portion of like the early play stuff and get packages and port and power at 2 as well. So like they're effectively very similar, doing similar things about that same power threshold at that same line. So I think there's something to be said about that kind of going forward with this, but I think those are some pretty important things to kind of be on the lookout for as you go forward with this.
But I also think that that's the nature of BCS, is 2 things. 1, you never know what you're going to sit across from, and if you are not prepared to basically face off against any card you can imagine, you can get beat once. Like, you may sit across from a thing, play it, and then go, okay, I know how it works, I will never lose to this again. But if you already lost once, you're never going to see it again. You only get 1 shot. It's not a best of 3 format. So decks like this that are a little more off the wall and can catch out even experienced players who have no idea like what the plan for a deck is, because you only get to see so many cards in the waiting room, and the triggers can only tell you so much about a deck's game plan. So being caught by surprise is definitely a thing. So you need to be very vigilant. You need to be able to respond to basically anything, which is why some decks do really, really well in Springfest and other decks don't do as well. Even when we're talking about top decks, the best decks in Springfest are the ones that are really responsive and can answer, a variety of threats because of the very nature of the format. The second thing is that you can play anything into a Springfest and have some success. 1, because you can catch people out, but 2, because you get to tune your matchups. Like, you get to tune for specifically dealing with certain things. There are a lot of sets out there that have out cards to specific matchups that will never get played in singles format because the deck is just not powerful enough. But in trios format, where the power level is generically lower, across your rounds, and you also only need to go 4-2 to kind of do your job for your team, you can play into something, that specifically deals with matchups in a certain way, that, gets over specific power thresholds, and you're ready for that matchup because you've trained into that matchup, you've tested into it. Your opponent has to figure it out on the fly. So teams like this, these kinds of team compositions, work in Springfest. And that's one of the reasons I like Springfest so much, is because you can do stuff like this and have a legitimate chance of success. So tip of the hat to this team. This is a really fun composition. Rest of top 8, pretty diverse. Not as much slime as you would expect, given how successful it was in California. 2 slimes in Houston, top 8, 1 in London. You also see some Konosuba, Guilty Gear Danmachi, Arifureta. So this is, you're going to see that stuff. There's a Bang Dream back in London that we didn't talk about. So you're going to see some stuff that's a little bit different get tops at Springfest, and that's just, part and parcel of this format. Lastly, just a couple of notes. One, Azure Lane getting a reprint at some point. We don't have a schedule for it. We don't have a date. It's happening. Azure Lane English reprint for that first set. And finally, JP stream late Tuesday night if you're in the US. I think early Wednesday morning if you're in Europe. But regardless, JP product stream. Maybe we'll see HoloLive 3 and Konosuba 3 announced. That's just happening tomorrow, so we'll keep an eye on that. Probably talk a little bit about what gets announced next time. But until next time, thank you for joining us. We'll be back on Thursday with, I think, 5 cards, 5 minutes. We'll talk about more event results and hopefully what went down on the JP stream in 2 weeks. Until next time, thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and have a good one.
We'll see you then.